Charlie, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I first of all want to appreciate everybody who's taking time out of their busy schedule to join. Today, Charlene Li will be presenting being disrupted versus being disruptive. My name is Matt Malenga. I'm the CMO here at Welcome, a Newsprint brand. Today, I'm here with Charlene Li, New York Times bestselling author, an expert in digital transformation, as well as digital growth, disruption, and strategies. Welcome, Charlene, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking today, as Matt said, about what it means to be disrupted and also how to be disruptive, it's just the opposite of that, and especially in today's environment. And this is especially hard and relevant because of all the chaos and the crises, the turbulence that we're experiencing. Of course, we've got the pandemic happening. We also have all of the economic uncertainty. And then later on top of that, we have a lot of work around social justice. And here in the United States, we just went through the election too as well. So a lot of turmoil, a lot of disruption and chaos happening in our world. And the way I think about this is that while there may be a lot of disruption happening, it's also a time of great change. Because one thing I've learned in my research around disruption is that when you have disruption, you're creating opportunities for change. The reality is those needs that existed before don't go away. They may have changed and shifted, though, to something completely new. And that creates opportunities for organizations, for people, for society to be able to understand, how do I meet those needs now? The pain and needs and the wants that people have shifted. And again, the opportunities that are created because of this disruption are there for people to be able to reach and need and meet. So the question is becoming, how do you actually deal with this? And if you look at this chart, it actually shows the gross domestic product of the United States over since the 1970s. And you can see during the up and down periods, the down cycles were actually times of great innovation, even in the midst of all the disruption that's happening. Go back to the 1970s, in the middle of the Middle East oil crisis. You had Microsoft starting in the middle of all of that. And even in our last recession, that was the time when Uber was created in 2008 and Airbnb also just around that same time. In fact, what we have found is that times of recession, of chaos, this disruption, are times when people are able to focus on these unmet needs that are starting to evolve and come out. When times are flush, when times are good, everyone's busy making the money. And it's actually the times when things are constrained where innovation really happens. So this is a good time to think about how you want to be approaching this space. Are you going to be one amongst the people who are disrupted, meaning that you're going to wait and wait for the chaos to calm down, wait for things to become more stable before stepping out? That is a surefire way that the times and the pace are going to pass you by, and you'll be among the disrupted. I think a different way to think about this is, how can you be disruptive? Meaning you're going to take the situation as it is and figure out your way through it, how to navigate through it. And in particular, find those opportunities for growth and change and impact. So we're going to talk about that. How do you actually do that today? And also put it in the context of how organizations work, how marketing departments need to work very differently. So just to give you an example of how an organization that did this, let's take a look at T-Mobile. Back in about 8-10 years ago, they were a distant fourth player. So back in 2012, at the end of the year, they had just gone through a failed merger with AT&T and was trying to figure out, like, how do we move forward? They were a distant fourth player, and they had Sprint and Verizon and AT&T above them, and they were casting about saying, how do we do this? Do we become the urban brand? Do we become the youth brand? They did lots of research and found that people just consistently wanted better coverage and better pricing. The two truisms of the mobile wireless place. But then it did some more research, digging down deep into what was really going on with consumers. And what they found is that they were really angry. They were fed up. They were frustrated with the relationships they had with all of these mobile carriers. The fact that they were tied into these 2-year contracts, the fact that they couldn't get data, they couldn't get a new phone until 2 years after, no matter how much they wanted a new phone, they were locked into these contracts. And it was really confusing about how they were actually, what their rights were. And even just trying to get service, trying to get somebody to call them back, it was really hard. So across the board, what T-Mobile found was that people were just fed up with their mobile carriers. So they saw this as an opportunity. They said, maybe we could actually drive growth by doing just the opposite what every other mobile carrier does. And so they came up with a new positioning, and that was called the UnCarrier. And you may have seen this, you may even be a T-Mobile customer yourself, and you could see and feel the difference. Now, you may look at this and say, well, that's a branding exercise. That's a value prop shift. But it was more than that. When T-Mobile became the uncarrier, they became so much more. They decided to change everything. They changed the CEO, who was very vocal about being an advocate for customers. They changed the way they answered the phones. People were given the opportunity to really work with customers, listen to them. And they were given the power also to be able to change things. And they were given a lot of more discretion to do that. Everything changed about the carrier. And as a result, they started growing, really bringing customers in. And it caused a tremendous amount of disruption. I just want to show you some of the numbers of what resulted. So you can see going back to 2011, 2012, where T-Mobile was just really not doing well. But in 2013, you started seeing the tide changing. And 2014 just kept accelerating. And this past year, they were able to acquire Sprint and now are very much in a position to challenge the other top 2 players. Now, you could look at this and say, well, this is not the way you normally think about disruption or disruptive innovation or transformation. And that's right. It's not about a new technology. And yet, when I study technology and disruption, I've been an analyst for 20 years, and I can tell you that it's almost never about the technology. It's about how people use the technologies and change the way they have relationships with each other. So here in this case, what T-Mobile did was highly disruptive because they challenged certain ideas, like you have to have a 2-year contract. They said, no more. We're tearing up those contracts. In the process, forced Verizon and AT&T to follow them. They said, why should you be limited by data? So they gave away data. You could eat as much data as you wanted. And all the other carriers had to follow suit. It's a really interesting example of an organization saying, where are those opportunities? And really digging down and truly understanding what are the needs of those customers and being able to meet them at that moment. So when we think about how to do this, though, it becomes a huge issue around integration and scaling. When we looked at the digital marketing organization, and this is from our latest research on the state of digital marketing from Altimeter, we asked what were the top obstacles to progress for your digital marketing organization. And right at the very top, it's about purchasing, figuring out, and integrating the right technology programs and the platforms. Because if you want to have this disruptive move forward, you need to move as one organization. And as we know, most organizations are not on the same platform. And especially if you're trying to engage with a customer as a marketing department, it's in many different places, many different silos. Some other key areas are hiring the right talent, and then also scaling and marketing the best practices across all the business units. So these are some top issues around marketing. And I want to just illustrate what this actually looks like. I think that the biggest issue of being disruptive is being able to orchestrate all the different parts of marketing and making sure that there's a lot of openness and transparency in how you're actually operating and creating these moments of truth so you can all come together. So just for example, coming into the organization, you have a lot of different ideas. You have information coming from many different corners, from many different customers across different channels, the data that's being generated by them. And then you also have some really good and valid expertise that's being layered on top of this, providing you insights. All of those have to come together into what I call a moment of truth. And that moment of truth is that point of decision where you decide this is what the truth is and this is what we're going to do with it and what the actions are. And then coming out of that are all the decisions, the execution details, and also the accountability of who was going to do what. And did people follow through? Now, this is really difficult in a traditional marketing organization because you've got people working on brand, you have people working on product marketing, other people working on advertising and paid and social, and you got PR and communications. All of this needs to be coordinated and orchestrated, and it gets really hard and messy to do. And what I found that disruptive organizations do so well is that they are really good at making sure that orchestration happens. It was one of the most counterintuitive things I found in my research. And that is the most disruptive organizations are also the most process-oriented, the most organized, the most well-run organizations out there. Because when they knew how to work well together, they were able to focus on the work that needed to be done. So this brings back a very important question that I get asked many times. How do we break down these silos that exist across all the organizations? Well, I would actually say you don't break down the silos because the silos are really important. They're there to make sure that people are functioning really well, developing areas of expertise, and that the operations within that function work extremely well so you can execute. Instead of thinking about it as breaking down silos, think about it as building windows, installing windows between the silos so that your customers can flow seamlessly through every single part of the organization. And their data can follow them. So they don't get this sense that they're being thrown over the wall from one silo to the next. To them, it's all seamless, frictionless. And that requires, again, a tremendous amount of work inside of the marketing organization just to make sure you're seeing those customers from one view and be able to create those moments of truth in a unified way. So let's talk about how this all comes together into how work is going to look, the future of work inside of organizations and especially within marketing. So to illustrate this, I'd like you to think about the best job you ever had, the best team you've ever worked on, where you felt united. And if you think about that best job, it comes down to one word: your team, the relationship you had with that team, the fact that you were joined together in a common cause and that you were working towards a purpose. You had full communications back and forth each other. You had a high level of trust and frankly, accountability. And people could come to each other and say, things aren't going right. How can we actually make things better? I'm depending on you, my team, to be able to do this. What I found with disruptive organizations is that they have these kinds of teams. They work in this future already today. And I think there's no reason why you can't have this future of work yourself. So I feel like the future work isn't defined by, again, these technologies. It's defined by the types of relationships we have with each other and the way that we have decided to work with each other. So some of the pitfalls I find around thinking about the future of work is, well, if we think that the future, we're kind of waiting for that future to unfold. Where is that future going to be? So until it gets here, we're just going to continue doing the way things are. And we're also going to assume that someone else is going to take care of it. This is somebody else's job. Or that if we figure out what the future of work looks like once, we're done. And again, the mistake of focusing on tech. So instead, what I would say are a couple of things to think about, 5 things to think about creating this future work and making it come forward today. The first one is to audit your beliefs. I mean, one of the key things that we saw over just the past few months was that, we have to have everybody working in the same place. Clearly, since March and April, we have completely destroyed that belief. We can work. Again, it's not the same as working side by side with each other, but we can learn to work in a different way. What we did in 5 or 10 days back in March, we thought would have taken 5 or 10 years. We can do so much more and go further than we ever thought ourselves capable of doing. I want to share with you very quickly 3 beliefs of disruptive organizations. These, again, are organizations that are experiencing the future of work today. They tend to be very open in the way they think about the communications, the information that they have, and how they have transparency around decisions and create accountability and trust with that. There's a strong sense of agency, which is that every single person, every employee feels like they are themselves an owner. This is very different from being empowered. Empowered thinks, somebody over there, some people over there are going to give me permission to be able to act and make change. Agency says, I already have that ability. And because there's openness, I know what the strategy is. I know how we need to move forward. I know what I need to do in order for us to move forward. It's my job. It's not somebody else's job to take the next step. And then finally, there's a bias for action. There's a sense that the future is here. It's running and moving further away from us. So we need to take action today. So the key question for you is to examine and take an audit of your beliefs. What beliefs are holding you back from being more disruptive? What beliefs are holding you back from being more coordinated and orchestrated within your department? And what I find a very helpful thing to do is to be with your team. Most of us have to do this remotely, but write down the beliefs that you think are holding us back and then share them. And then agree that some of these, we all agree we don't want to think this way anymore. And we're not going to. We're going to hold ourselves to that. We're not going to believe these ideas. Instead, we're going to adopt these new beliefs, and we're going to move forward and identify the behaviors that go with them. So some beliefs that I hear from people oftentimes are things like, I can't speak up. I can't really disagree with people in a safe way. We need more data. We need to be absolutely sure. We can't be, we can't fail. We can't make mistakes. Things have to be perfect. Or people will say, I'm just a fill in the blank. I've heard people say, I'm just an individual contributor. I'm just a manager. I'm just a VP. I've even heard CEOs say, I'm just a CEO. I can't change things. Well, everybody says that, nothing's going to change. And the hallmark of a leader is when somebody says, I see a change and I'm going to make it happen. It's not dependent on title. It's the fact that something I see needs to happen and change, and there's impact that we can have, and I'm going to be the person to step up and make that happen. And I think, again, there's a sense that everyone has to agree in order to move forward. I think the strongest organizations, the most disruptive organizations, encourage people to have backbone, to disagree strenuously. And then when that moment of truth comes, they commit and then move forward together. So these are fundamental ways to be thinking about what that relationship could look like. And one of the things that you can do is to use stories to inspire these new beliefs. I love the story of the Post-it notes, how they were created. Two people in disparate parts of 3M. One person had a glue that frankly didn't work. And another person had a problem of keeping notes stuck into his choir rehearsal book, so they kept falling out, and he was really frustrated with that. And the two of them came together and created Post-it notes. And they thought this is the greatest thing. But when they went to the executive team at 3M and proposed this, the executives go, who would ever want this? They said, no, we're not going to do this. Undaunted, that team, these two people went back to the executive assistants of those executives, gave them these Post-it notes, just put them on their desk. And when they ran out, they kept talking to their executives, we need more of these. Now that story can inspire and change the belief and change the idea that new ways of working, new ideas and opportunities for disruption can come from anywhere. These stories probably exist inside of your organization in the early days of your founding, or maybe just in the past few months where you've seen people really come together. Take those stories and use them to inspire these new beliefs. The second thing I would say is to review your purpose. Again, one of the hallmarks of great workplaces, of people working together, is that we're united in what we're trying to do. I like to ask the question of people, so how do you serve the world? How are you really making a difference? And why are we coming together to create something? What's the purpose behind that? And that may have changed over the past few months as we've adjusted the way we work. So ways to think about your purpose. Here are some best practices around that. Is it authentic? Does it line up with the way you're trying to work, what your business strategy is? Is it inspiring? Does it paint a picture of what the future is going to look like, what you're building towards? Is it shared? Can you walk around your organization and people can tell you in their own words what that purpose is? And most importantly, is it actionable? Are you using it on a daily basis and using it to help you make decisions to pull together as a team? And is it consistent with how you're showing up in the world and facing your customers? So one of the things that I love are some symbols that organizations use. This is a wall from OXO. They make household goods. And when you walk into their offices, they have this beautiful wall of discarded gloves that their employees picked up from all around New York. And they hang them up on this wall. And it's a reminder to them every day when they walk into the office of who their customers are. Their customers use your products, and these customers have hands that are small. Some of them are big, some of them are old and arthritic. It's a reminder that this is their purpose when they walk in every day. So, and this is also another way to think about purpose. This is from T-Mobile. What they did is they wrote a manifesto at the very beginning of their process becoming the UnCarrier. And it was used internally at first for branding purposes, but then they said, let's share this with people internally because we need our employees to understand that we're not just here just as a business, we're on a movement. We're purpose driven to create a better experience to really make a difference in people's lives. And it reads, we're not like other wireless carriers. Why would we be? They're in the phone company business. We're in the change in the phone company business. And it ends, we are T-Mobile, the UnCarrier, and we will be unrelenting. So this is a call to arms. This is a call to create a movement. And what I found is that disruptive organizations need to create movements to bring people along because it is such a long and hard and arduous journey as you go along. So let's talk about the next area, which is a focus on belonging. When you think about your team, the future of work, it is an idea that there is safety, there's security in that space. And it's absolutely true because if you want to be disruptive, you want to be able to create a place where people can come up with different ideas. And if you're going to raise your hand and be the only person in the room of a particular, if you're a gender or of ethnic identity, even coming from a different socioeconomic or educational background, if you do not feel like you belong, that you are part of that tribe, it's going to be really hard to raise your hand. So focusing on issues like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion may sound like a nice thing to do, especially with the social justice issues going on, but I would say it's absolutely strategic. Because if you want to be as disruptive as you can be, if you want to create this strong sense of team in that future of work, then you need to make sure that everyone feels like they're part of that tribe. A simple way to do this, start surveying your employees. How well do they feel like they belong? And look for the actual markers of what belonging means. Do I feel like I'm invited? Do I feel like I can speak up? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like I am part of that tribe? And if that's not as strong as it could be, then think about ways that you could be increasing that, especially during these times we're not sitting next to each other in the same office. One of the best ways to do this is to establish really clear processes and procedures and practices. This is a time, again, when things are being disruptive and things are chaos, to lay down these new best practices. How will we come together? And how will we establish that sense of team? It's so easy to be pulled into Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. And some organizations create practices where 15 minutes before and 15 minutes after, it is just free time. And we will gather as if we're in a room together and just be with each other to create that stronger sense of belonging. But again, processes and practices are the hallmark, I think, of really well-run disruptive organizations. Because when you know how things work, you don't have to worry about that. And you can focus completely on these new disruptive exercises and initiatives that you want to create. I think that rituals also create a strong sense of belonging. Some of you may be rugby fans, but this is the New Zealand team from rugby, and they perform this is an amazing dance called the haka dance. It's a tribal dance from New Zealand. And it's incredibly bonding for the team and for the fans, and very intimidating for their competitors. What are the rituals you are putting in place to create that sense of belonging, that sense of welcome, but also a sense of passage, of recognition, of time served, but also saying goodbye. And when we have these strong rituals, again, it binds us to each other. And there's a sense of comfort and also stability. So double down on the symbols, the stories, and the rituals to create that strong sense of belonging. The fourth thing I would say is to clarify clear expectations. Again, things are changing so rapidly, so be really clear about what are the results you want. How are you going to be shifting the way you do work? How do we balance the fact that we're working out of our homes now, and there's very little differentiation between work and family and home? And also, what kind of areas are we going to be increase our flexibility and agility? Because all of this requires definition. We can't let it just be out there. One of the best things I've seen organizations do is to really clearly, very clearly define the field of play. Because when you can define that, people then feel safe to be able to go out there and disrupt. I'll give you an example. If you think about, you say to your organization, let's go out there, let's go take more risks. Let's go out there and try lots of new different things. Unless you tell people these are that edges of how far we can go, guess what's going to happen? People are going to stay really close to the center. They're going to stay right up close to their comfort zone and maybe venture 5 or 10% out. But if instead you very clearly set expectations, anything within this sandbox, within this playground, go for it. Go right up to the very edge. Explore how far we can go. And know that you're completely safe. Anything can happen inside of here, and it's fair game. When you set expectations like that, it's amazing what people will do. Because then they suddenly feel free. You're giving them permission to be able to play across any part of those areas. Now, in the beginning, you may have to define a really small field of play because you just won't know what those edges are. But over time, you can expand what that court looks like. And then everybody will be playing a much bigger and better game than you could ever expect. One of the things that Nokia did, which I really admire, is that they were very clear because they were going through some really hard times. This is back when they were laying off a lot of people, anticipating, because they were shifting away from handsets. They were selling that off and going into new businesses. So they were very clear with their employees what was going to happen, when that date was going to be, when the shifts were going to happen. And they created 5 very clear paths for an exit ramp. They could find a new job within Nokia. They could go and find a job outside where they would actively help them do that. They could start a new business and get funding for Nokia. They could go back to school, or they can create something completely new. Some people were starting new nonprofits, for example. But the fact that they acknowledged that the time was coming to an end, that this shift was going to happen, and then created clarity and clear expectations and paths forward, actually created a firm foundation of stability for people. People weren't wondering what was going to happen. They were very clear about what was going to happen. So in multiple ways, having clear expectations for people is a key part. And then finally, I would encourage you to think about how you can communicate in a very different way. I call it communicating in a 3D way. The way our leadership requires communication across multiple dimensions now. It needs to be much more dynamic, much more direct, and also distributed across all the different channels that people are working in. So we've all experienced this, but to double down on this even more is very important. One of my favorite examples of this is Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn. And he talks constantly about what the purpose, the mission, the strategy, the values of LinkedIn are. And he uses every single channel possible available to him. I'll tell you a little story. One time, every time he meets people, greets people, internally, externally, he says, "Hey, it's Jeff. Remember, our purpose at LinkedIn is to connect the world's professionals. And one of our key values is members first." And he says this every single time. And somebody called him on it. One employee asked him, "So Jeff, yeah, you say this every single time. When are you going to stop saying it?" And he said, "I'll stop saying it when people stop looking surprised." And that was it's such a wise thing to say, because we oftentimes as leaders think we say it once and it's heard, and it's not. We need constant reminders, a reminder of why we're doing this, How are we doing? Communicating constantly and across multiple dimensions is absolutely necessary to build this future of work together. It's a key to making sure that everybody on that team is connected to each other and the foundation for creating these relationships. So just to close up, and then we can open up for questions. Um, First of all, I would encourage you to think about what your comfort zone looks like and be ready to step out of it and to move way out of it, because that is where the magic happens. Disruption is not an easy thing to do. It is a very hard journey. I oftentimes think about innovation as being this false promise that, of course, we can do innovation. It'll be smooth. It'll be straightforward. We'll get there. That's not the way it works. If you're truly creating change that's meaningful and long lasting, it is going to be very disruptive. So prepare yourself, and prepare yourself to go all the way up to the very edge. I talked about that edge that you define, but what is your personal edge as a leader, as a part of the organization? You don't know how far you can go until you've gone up to the very edge. We saw the edge back in March, and we went right out to the very edge of it. And we not only survived, but I would actually say in many cases we're thriving now. So go out to the very edge, look over that precipice. And when you see that edge and it scares the daylights out of you, take one step back and then know that you're on solid ground, that you're safe, that you're there with your team, and then stay there. Do not retreat back to your comfort zone, because that is what it's going to take to be disruptive. And I think, again, just if you take nothing else from today, it is this, that we're in this state of disruption right now, but it is a tremendous opportunity to create change, both in the marketplace that you're active in, but also in your organization, to be able to create that future of work today. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Let me try to get the controls going, and have him take us through some other areas about what is going on at Welcome. So Matt, take it away.
Well, first of all, Charlene, thank you so much. That was both insightful and inspiring. You're going to laugh at me, but I have a few tears in my eyes. I'm not just saying that. I do. You'll be a tough act to follow, so I'll keep it short. But, what stood out to me is the importance of relationships, and maybe more importantly, the need for people to work better together, come together to drive change collectively, to drive disruption. And what I find interesting about this is we've commissioned a lot of research to kind of understand what's going on with marketers. How can they be more disruptive? How can they be freed up to do the things that they love to do? Whether it's creative, whether it's driving demand, whether it's branding, whether it's building relationships outside of the company. And when you think about it, the fundamental challenge or symptom of all of this is that the majority of marketers' time is actually spent on trivial work about work. These are not like doing the things that we think are fun. These are not things that are driving disruption. These are things like meetings, status meetings, approvals via emails, figuring out who I need to talk to get something approved. These things end up being work about work, and are the things that are keeping us from being the marketers we want to be. And to play off your silo analogy, is the research actually has revealed that there's basically 3 core silos that are actually the root cause to a lot of this work about work. And the first of which is teams. And so if you think about it, the marketing organization, as you point out, is broken up into specialized roles. And there's a reason for that, because marketing really is a collection of specialists. We have people that focus on very specific things because they're skilled in doing those things. It requires a level of specialization. But with that, sometimes there's silos, like how do we communicate with, in big organizations or even small, with people that we maybe don't interact with often. Maybe sometimes their role is just to approve creative assets or to review like work that's being done to make sure it's compliant. The second one is processes, inconsistent processes across marketing. So we hear this all the time. We need more processes. I think, Charlene, you even touched on it. Like, processes are really critical to disruptive organizations. Like, the key is not to have too many processes. And one way of accomplishing that is making those processes more transparent, more consistent, more standardized. And obviously the workflows that are associated with them. And the last one, although I can't seem to get my slide to move forward, is this notion of MarTech. Like, we all know that there's been an explosion in MarTech, and just as there's been an explosion in team specialization within marketing, it seems like there's a MarTech tool for just about everything we do. But the question is how do you connect all this? How do you get all these specialized teams, these processes, and these siloed MarTech stacks to work better together? Because with all this going on, as a marketer, it's hard to be disruptive when you're spending your day on work about work. And so at Welcome, the way we think about this is we're the connective tissue, right? We provide the tools that help take the friction out of some of that execution so you can be disruptive. I think our platform's designed not only to be the connective tissue that helps break down those silos, or maybe not break them down. Charlene said you're not trying to break them down. What you're really trying to do is connect them and connect them more effectively. And we like to think of Welcome as that work layer that allows you to automate some of this mundane stuff so you can focus on doing what you love to do. And with that said, I want to thank everyone. I'm going to quickly go through some questions here. If anybody has questions, I don't see a lot right now. But Charlene, let me ask you a few questions as we went through this presentation. My first of which is, if you're an organization and you have a desire to drive change and you want to be disruptive, but you don't feel like you're empowered to, like, what would be your course of action or recommendations to that individual?
I would look for the changes that you can see immediately. Again, if you haven't been in that space where you've been creating a lot of change, then I wouldn't try to create a huge amount of change across the organization right off the back. Disruptive leadership is something you develop over time. So look for some change that you can see that you feel like you can actually make a difference in. It could be within your team. It could be within your department. It could be something completely different. But I'll give an example. One woman was very, very keen on sustainability and was just distraught about the fact that they were using styrofoam cups still. And so she checked around and, nobody in procurement, nobody in facilities could really help. So she goes, I've seen some mugs sitting out in the PR and marketing department. So I'm just going to swap those in and just tell the facility people, don't stop the stuff, just encourage people not to use the styrofoam cups. It seems like a small, inconsequential thing, but in many ways, that person said, I'm not going to take no as an answer. I can see that there's a solution here. I'm going to make a tie that knots the dots together. But it could also be what I would say the most important thing to do, if you really want to create systemic change in your organization, figure out the top 3 goals of any leader that you're working with have access to. And whatever change you are trying to create, make sure it helps advance one of those 3 goals. Because if you're promoting a change that's going to be way off in left field, it's just going to you're distracting us. Versus if it's a change that really helps that leader move one of those 3 goals forward, then you're going to be seen as a champion. And even better, ask your leader, these are our top 3 initiatives. Which one of them do you feel is really stuck and why? Or which of these do you really want to accelerate and why? If you can understand that, then you look for disruptions and changes that can really address those issues.
Thank you. That was very thoughtful. I'm going to throw another one out here too, Charlene, which is as I observe social injustice happening today, I can see in the real world outside of business, not that business is not the real world, but I can see people that are willing to take risk and do things to help drive change, whether it's tearing down statues that they think are antiquated or don't represent the current state of affairs. Do you believe that within large organizations, change has to be driven from top down? Or do you believe that there can also be a groundswell from individuals to help drive that change?
Well, having written a book called Groundswell, I absolutely believe that coming from the bottom up is very effective. I think, again, in the end, though, you cannot create that fundamental final change unless your top executives are on board, which is why I focus so much on leadership. But the groundswell can absolutely push that pressure. And the more disruptive organizations that are there, the more power it actually is at the front lines. I mean, the sea change I've seen happen over the past 5 years or so is that because of technology, we're actually able to listen to the front lines much more effectively, get insights from them, and empower them, give them the ability to have those insights, and then using artificial intelligence, speed it to the right parts of the organization. Our leaders have become much better at listening, not just to the direct reports, but to the entire organization and to customers. And so that's why I think the power of the groundswell is so much there. I would always encourage people that if you see a change that needs to happen, then tell people about it. That's why you're a leader. A leader has nothing to do with your title. A leader is simply somebody who sees a change that needs to happen and then makes it happen, brings people to that cause. So I
Yeah,
think everybody has the potential to be a leader.
yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think everybody can be a leader. And it's a matter of how do you apply that in the workplace. Well, Charlene, there's no additional questions here today. Wait a minute. So this one came in from Mary. Clear, streamlined processes are so key to disruption because it allows teams to be more efficient, freeing time up to be more innovative. But how do you encourage teams and individuals within large organizations to embrace universal processes?
Yeah, so universal processes and processes in general, it's so easy to layer them on top of each other. And then you have huge processes and governance and 4 layers of gates and everything. I'm a bit of a governance geek, to be honest. I really love good governance, not lots of governance. I keep going back to using the processes to focus on one thing. And that is, can you understand your customer better than anyone else? And every process that you have has to be geared towards that and aligning everybody in the organization towards that customer. Because that is the universal truth. Your customers will hold you accountable to what their needs are. And they will tell you right away, you're not cutting it. So being close to them, streamlining your processes around that universal truth of who the customer is and how we're doing with them is, I think, the way to get to those universal processes. So Mary, I would say, take a look at all those processes, audit them and say, does it help us get closer to the customer, get closer faster, more efficiently to the customer, and make sure that everybody in the organization knows what that truth is.
Thank you, Charlene. And I like that you pick a North Star. That North Star is easy to pick because it is your customers. And that's what you focus on.
Right.
One more question came rolling in. This is from an anonymous attendee. Processes obviously help with disruption, but what do you recommend when timelines and constraints around your processes hold you back from being first to market or slower to execution?
Yeah, I love it how people go, well, we're working really fast. We'll get this in about 2 years. I'm like, 2 years? Your customers that you're working on have already moved on. I mean, I was working with one organization. They were looking at uniforms. I'm like, oh yeah, it's going to take 18 months for us to figure out how we're going to revise our uniforms. I'm like, they're uniforms. What's going on here? And what happens is oftentimes people are sitting on 15 different projects, and they have to be in every single one of those projects. And the next meeting when they can take another decision is completely dependent on when all 15 members of that one committee are available to meet. It could be 2 to 3 weeks away. This is why things grind down to a halt. Versus, again, if you are completely focused on that customer, you're falling in love with that customer. When you're falling in love with your customer, you do everything possible to be with them and to serve them and to do the right thing by them. When you have these processes and long timelines, you haven't fallen in love with your customers. You're falling in love with how you do work. into the work for work's sake that you talked about, Matt, you're not focusing on the right thing. If you were really truly focused on that customer, you would shorten those timelines. You would have what I call that bias for action, and you would do everything possible to get those decisions out into the field so you can see if they work or not. So it's a very different way of working, a very different type of mindset that's required if you want to be disruptive. So in an organization that's kind of tied up in knots around all these things, I would look for one project, one place where you can practice this acceleration. And it doesn't have to be big, but you have to develop this muscle of thinking and working in a different way. And instead of tackling a big project that could be shrunk down, look for something that would have taken maybe 2 months and say, could we do it in 2 weeks? It was something in 2 weeks. Could we do it in 2 days? Set impossible deadlines, and then you can move forward with that.
Yeah, and that's very insightful. And I'm actually going to add a little bit to this, but I'm going to do it on a more tactical level, which is we have lots of customers who encounter this problem. And sometimes you have to take one step back to move 2 steps forward. And what I mean by that is once there's a groundswell and people recognize and can define the problem, and it's often not just the process. Sometimes it's data silos. Sometimes it's the way you're organized. Sometimes it's as simple as you haven't defined your North Star, your customers. And at the end of the day, and I'm 100% in agreement with Charlene, technology will not solve the problem for you till you want to solve the problem. And then a tool like Welcome can help you solve that problem by taking a step back, reevaluating how you do work, making those processes more transparent, easier, and more seamless as you go about your work. Think about like which key integrations are slowing you down. Think about what data you really need versus what's nice to have to know what's working and what's not, what's driving to your North Star. And then you can begin to execute better and eliminate that work about work and get really focused and obsessed with your customers and ultimately become disruptive.
Hey, Matt, there was one other question here about perfectionism, how to get past that and the sense that we can't fail. I'll just very quickly say, if this is success and this is, perfection, the reality is you almost never hit it. What happens is you hit here, even despite all the best planning, this is where you end up. And when you realize that here is not failure, it just decides this is where you are. And then you know what the gap is now, and you can work on closing the gap. That's a very different way of mindset. Like if we don't hit 100%, it's a disaster, not fail. That's just not good. The difference is you could plan all the time to try to make sure where you end up is as close to that as possible. Or you can do like 10% of the work and maybe you're down here further on, but you've just gotten the gap. But now you know what the gap is. Versus before, you didn't know what that gap is. You were trying to remove every single possibility to get closer to this. This is the fundamentals of Agile. It's the fundamentals of disruptive organizations. You don't know what the answer is. And if you can remove the variables and get closer to that faster by making key decisions with minimally viable data in the very beginning, what's the one decision that we can make right now to move forward? And it's not to get the solution, but to move forward so the final solution is a little bit clearer for us than where we were standing before. Again, It's a completely different way of thinking. Really hard for organizations to do.
Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase, I think Thomas Edison here. I hope I don't butcher this thing, but hey man, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I discovered 10,000 ways not to build a light bulb. And the idea behind this light that he showed us is that if you're learning, right, you push forward, you get to the edge, as Charlene said, you push forward, they're not mistakes. They're opportunities for learning. So you're navigating to the next place so you come out to the final end where you want to be. And I think that was a really nice way that Thomas Edison summarized it. And I am quite sure I butchered the quote.
One of the biggest mistakes we make is that we think decisions are final. And there are 2 types of decisions inside of organizations. Ones that are absolutely irreversible. And the rest of them, the vast majority of decisions, 99% of decisions, you can go back on. You can change your mind. And yet we act as if it's the other way around, that 99% of decisions are irreversible. So that's why we have to have them be perfect. When you really look at it, when you're strong enough and confident enough in your leadership and your organization, that you can be vulnerable and say, yeah, we made a mistake. We learned from it. We're going to do things differently next time. And it's okay.
Yep, we're getting short on time here. I think we're actually past time here. But this is awesome because I think this was insightful, inspiring, things that we can all take away and learn from. Thank you so much, Charlene.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.